We're continuing the performance review series focusing on the Buffalo Bills' interior offensive line today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Tuesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day. And as a reminder to you, we are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. This episode of Locked On Bills is brought to you by Nissan. The only thing more exciting than the big game is the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. There's only a few days left until the Super Bowl. Are you ready? The Nissan Ariya, the EV for people who love to drive. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Well, folks, we're going to continue our discussion regarding the Buffalo Bills and evaluating the performance of the team in 2022 to consider what they actually need this offseason, and the focus is on the interior offensive line. And we'll obviously get into all the players, but before we dive into the discussion, I want to acknowledge that I think this is one of the areas on the team that is very upgradable. There is a spot here, a guard spot here, that I think should be a high priority for Brandon Beane this offseason, among the highest priorities that he has. And so let's dig into it. We'll start with the Bills' starting center, Mitch Morse, a 2019 free agent signing. He's 30 years old. He turns 31 in April, and Mitch is entering year one of his 2-year, $19.5 million contract extension. In 2022, he started 13 games, was on the field for 90% of offensive snaps, committed 3 penalties, gave up 3 sacks, and allowed 17 pressures on the quarterback. As far as his review from 2022, Mitch Morse continued to be a top-tier pass-blocking center in the NFL. Now, he's never going to be a dominant run blocker in terms of just moving bodies out of the way, but he offers really good range and athleticism. When Mitch Morse is able to pull, get out into space, climb to the second level, he's really, really effective. He's just not a dominant drive blocker. He's more of a technician when he's asked to create space up front. And so I think Mitch, in a lot of ways, just kind of continued to be the same player that he's always been. Now, where I thought we saw a lot of growth from Mitch Morse this year was from a leadership perspective. He got the C on his jersey. That's a big deal. Was obviously voted to the Pro Bowl, so an original Pro Bowl selection. He's not like Roger Saffold that was like multiple alternatives down the list before he got in and somehow he was a Pro Bowler. Mitch Morse was voted to the Pro Bowl. I think he had a good year. And when I consider the shortcomings of the Bills' offensive line in 2022, the two guys that I don't really put much of it on would be Dion Dawkins at left tackle and Mitch Morse at center. I think all of the other players had a higher ability that they could have performed at than what was displayed. So when I think about the Bills' offensive line in general, I come away most satisfied with Dion Dawkins and Mitch Morse. So my outlook for Mitch in 2023 is, first of all, I mean, this is an established player in the league. You know what he is. You know what he isn't. I'm looking for him to continue being a reliable center that provides top-tier pass blocking ability, range in the run game, but obviously you need to understand that he's not a player that's going to create big displacement in the run game. And so because of that, you want to make sure that you have a guy at guard that can really create some push to help overcome that. But Mitch Morse is every bit of a top 10 center in the NFL, and I anticipate that will continue in 2023. Let's move on to Ryan Bates. a player that was acquired through a 2019 trade. Brandon Beane sent Eli Harold to the Eagles for Ryan Bates. Bates is 25 years old. He turns 26 on Valentine's Day, and I think that's the second player so far that has a Valentine's Day birthday that we've uncovered here. As far as his contract, he's entering year 2 of his 4-year, $17 million contract that he signed last offseason. In 2022, he started 15 games, played 94% of snaps, gave up 3 penalties, committed 3 penalties, gave up 1 sack and 28 pressures. Now, the sack that he gave up, if you remember, was in week 1 against Aaron Donald. And a fun fact about that is the only sack Ryan Bates has allowed in his NFL career. And so he's been on the field for 854 pass blocking snaps for his career, and that is the lone sack that he's given up. As far as my 2020 review on Ryan Bates, the word that I have down is sufficient. Ryan Bates is a sufficient starter. He's not a top performer, but he won't kill you out there. And I'm mindful that this was his first year as an NFL starter. Obviously, showed some really good promise late in 2021, prompted the Bills to bring him back on that 4-year, $17 million deal after he had some interest from other teams as a restricted free agent, and then the Bills prioritized bringing him back. And so, his first year as a full-time starter, he spent his first 3 seasons in the NFL as a reserve, so that's quite the transition for him. And what's interesting about his year, and this was a big topic going into last season, was that he played right guard this year. And he said out loud in 2021 that he was most comfortable at left guard. So I think it's possible that Bates kicks back over to left guard in 2023. I think you can win with Ryan Bates at guard, but ideally, now here's the thing, before you lose your mind and say, Joe, you're not being tough enough on this offensive line. They needed to be better. Hear me out here. I think you can win with Bates at guard, but ideally, he's not your 3rd best offensive lineman. And he's your 5th best offensive lineman. And within this Bills starting front 5, I would say Dawkins, Morse are your clear top 2, and then it's Bates. And then probably Spencer Brown, and then Roger Saffold, who we'll talk about here in just a moment. So I think you can have a sufficient starter in Ryan Bates, but you don't want him as your 3rd best offensive lineman. I also think that it's worth mentioning that Bates provides a lot of versatility. Obviously, he's played all 5 spots throughout his career in the NFL, but in this past season, he played 810 snaps at right guard and then 135 at center. That versatility is a positive, and it makes him more valuable. So for my 2023 outlook with Ryan Bates, I'm absolutely looking for him to take a step. I think he should obviously at this point fully understand the grind of being a starter. I like that he's still young. He's entering his age 26 season, has some playing time under his belt now. He's shuffled around a bit, right? Multiple spots. And, when you look back at his entire career going back to his college time at Penn State, I mean, he was mostly a left tackle at Penn State. So his first year of playing time in 2016, he played a little bit of the snaps at left guard, but mostly left tackle. Then in 2017 and 2018, his last 2 seasons at Penn State, he's a left tackle. And then he comes into the NFL, and in 2019 and 2020, he didn't play a ton, but the snaps that he did play were at left tackle and right tackle. So then he finally kind of makes this transition in 2021 to playing center guard, center, left guard, and right guard. And then this year it's right guard with some center. And so we know that Bates isn't going to play tackle for the Bills. He's going to be an interior player. And so I think being able to not only enter this offseason having been a starter and projected to again be a starter, but doing so with an understanding of where he's going to play. And I think that will be helpful as we consider if he can be a better player next season. Because we know he's locked up for a little bit of time here. And I think there's, it's certainly my expectation that he's going to start next year. And so I think there's some things that you can cling to give you hope that Ryan Bates can take a step next year and be a more impactful starter for the Bills. And again, hopefully he's not your third best offensive lineman when we look back at the 2023 season when it's all said and done. I hope that you've been getting in on the action over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is my favorite daily fantasy resource. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available, and Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. So if it's NBA, college hoops, NHL, college basketball, women's college basketball, soccer, of course, the NFL, you name it, you can find it over at Prize Picks, and entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. So if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Just don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, let's talk about Roger Saffold and Greg Van Roten in this segment. And then, of course, we'll get to Ike Boettger and kind of tie a ribbon on the interior offensive line. So Roger Saffold, a 2022 free agent signing, 34 years old. He turns 35 in June. His contract is expired. Signed a 1-year, $6.3 million deal, and that contract is up. In 2022, Saffold started 16 games, was on the field for 98% of snaps, allowed 2 sacks, 36 pressures, and committed 10 penalties. As far as my review for Roger Saffold in 2022, he was just a letdown. A massive down year for him compared to the standard that he set throughout his career. A lot of mental mistakes, a lot of technical lapses. His misses in pass protection and in the run game were startling. I thought at a minimum he could come in and be a quality run blocker because throughout his career he's been a really, really good run blocker. And over the last few years, the pass pro has taken a dip, but you figured between Morse and Dawkins, you have at least a guy that can really create displacement in the run game, and you can get by with him in pass protection. But the run game was as bad as the pass pro. He was just very disappointing. And I feel let down because I thought he was a big reason why I bought into this offensive line entering the season. And again, just a huge letdown. So as for my 2023 outlook for Roger Saffold, I mean, clearly this guy wants to be a Bill. If you're unfamiliar with his Twitter account during the season, he really went in and said, look, he loves being in Buffalo and that he'd do anything to stay, and almost like begged Brandon Beane to, keep him in Buffalo. I mean, that's great, but I'd be looking to get younger and better at guard. Now, if you want to take advantage of bringing him back as a reserve, okay, maybe we can talk about that, especially because the Bills are committing $2 million in dead cap space to him next year, right? Based on him having a void year. So you're paying him $2 million to and basically not be on your team. So you can maybe take advantage of that and use dead cap space on a player that will actually be on your roster. But I don't really want to live in a world where Roger Saffold is back as a starter at guard for the Bills. I'd rather Ryan Bates get back to his more natural position at left guard and then find a significant upgrade at the other guard spot. So I appreciate that he was durable. I think that was one of the question marks at Tennessee, just different injuries and not being able to finish a lot of games. But he was on the field for 98% of the entire snaps this season. So I could appreciate that about him, but his performance was simply not good enough. Let's talk about Greg Van Roten, 2022 free agent signing. He's 32 years old. He turns 33 later this month in February. His contract's expired. Completed his 1-year, $1.3 million deal. 2022, he played in 16 games with 4 starts, was on the field for 33% of the offensive snaps. He did not allow a sack. He did give up 10 pressures, and he did commit 3 penalties. As for his review, Greg Van Roten is a perfectly fine interior backup offensive lineman. Now, I think we learned that he's a lot better at guard than center. There was some snap issues when he had to play center, and when Ryan Bates was healthy, Ryan Bates went in for Mitch Morse over Greg Van Roten. So they would put, Mitch Morse goes down, Bates goes from right guard to center, and then Greg Van Roten comes in at right guard. And I know that in a perfect world, you don't have to replace multiple spots if one guy goes down, but I think Greg Van Roten kind of proved that he's a bit of a liability with his snaps at center, and his best value is going to be at guard. And so while you kind of label him this veteran backup at 3 spots, I think in reality, you only want him to play 2. But that in a pinch, get you out of a game type situation, there's some value for that, excuse me. Again, backup for a reason, but I think he provides reasonable depth at guard. As for his 2023 outlook, we'll see if he's back. If he is, the deal will be minimal, right? A 1-year, $1.3 million deal last year, and I would expect it to be something like that again. I think with a player like Greg Van Roten, and I'd extend this same type of thought to a David Questenberry type player, it's nice to have him in the Rolodex, right? It's nice to have him in your contacts as someone who you have familiarity with. He has familiarity with you, and if you need to bring in an offensive lineman, that's helpful. He was kind of a later signing last offseason. I don't think there's a huge demand. I don't think teams are lining up to sign Greg Van Roten. But like I said, good to have in the Rolodex if you have to get a player to add depth to your football team. Today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Are you looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat and calories? Well, then you got to try Built Bars. These things are awesome. They're so good. They're so tasty. They are the best tasting protein bars on the planet. And what makes them so good is, well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in so many great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. And look, I don't know how they do it, but they're so tasty and good for you. But that's the thing, is they're good for you. They're tasty and good for you. They're healthy, only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And look, for years, I've been telling you, go to built.com and you can order these things, and you still can. But now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. You can head to your local Walmart or Sam's Club today and get yourself a box of Built Bar. So if you're close, run in and grab yourself a box. You can thank me later. These are the best tasting protein bars on the planet. All right, let's talk about Ike Boettger and then tie a ribbon on this interior offensive line. So Ike Boettger, 2018 undrafted free agent, 28 years old. He turns 29 in October. His contract is expired. He completed his 1-year, $1.2 million deal. In 2022, he played just six snaps, for the entire season. He was active for 4 games and got on the field for 6 snaps against the Bears. So obviously that makes his review kind of challenging. There's not a whole lot to review here, given how little he played. And of course, it took him a while to come back and be available, recovering from that Achilles injury that he suffered in 2021. Now, I think we can look back at the contributions that he made in 2020 and 2021 and realize that this is a reasonable player, right? You're never going to want this guy to, be viewed as an impact starter for you, but he's a reasonable player, a rosterable player that can legitimately help you at 3 spots on the interior. So as for my 2023 outlook as it relates to Ike Boettger, I bet the Bills bring him back on another one of those very minimal 1-year, $1.2 million type deals. There's a lot of familiarity here. I mean, this guy's been part of the mix since 2018. And they keep sticking with him, right? He's kind of been this like mystery 8th, 9th offensive lineman that continues to make the roster. There's a lot invested there in his development. He's got on the field and provided some reasonable production. I know that the team likes him a lot from a locker room perspective, right? One of those glue pieces. And I think he's reasonable insurance at one of those interior spots. Again, I don't want to live in a world where Ike Boettger is your preferred starter. But as a depth player, again, familiarity, versatility, good locker room presence. He's a nice player to have as a depth offensive lineman. So what's my overview for this interior offensive line? What do they have? Well, they have an excellent starter in Mitch Morse at center, a reasonable starter in Ryan Bates, but like I said, ideally he's not your third best offensive lineman. And they have a big hole at the other guard spot. They also have 3 expiring contracts: Roger Saffold, Greg Van Roten, and Ike Boettger. What do they need? Very obvious here. They need an upgrade at guard. Like I said at the beginning of this conversation, that is among the highest offseason priorities in my opinion. And whether it's a veteran, whether it's an early draft pick, I'd like to see a real meaningful addition here. I think they've tried to get by for too long. And maybe you look at Saffold and Bates and realize that was probably the most reasonable guard situation that the Bills have had in a while, given just a lot of inconsistency there. Just go back through the years here and remember names like Brian Winters and Cody Ford and Quentin Spain and John Feliciano. It's been a lot of names here. And you hate that because you know the one you struck gold with Wyatt Teller. You did the thing. You found a real steal. And then you traded him away and his development really took off in Cleveland. But there's just been so many different names throughout the years, and I've not enjoyed that. I think at left guard in particular, I think it's taken away from Deion Dawkins like we talked about on yesterday's podcast. And I think that puts stress on Mitch Morse at center. And so, you don't want to do the same thing on the other side too, where you got a young player in Spencer Brown at right tackle, right? We talk a lot about offensive line being 5 guys working together as one. And look, they're not all 5 of those guys aren't going to be top tier premier NFL players, right? And some people kind of believe in, well, as long as you don't have a bunch of tomato cans, you're okay. But look, I feel like this guard thing has been an issue for too long. And I'd like to see the Bills really get a guard tandem in place here that allows this offense to take a step, that creates displacement in the run game, that maintains that pocket depth in front of Josh Allen. It's been an inconsistent spot for a while. And so an early draft pick, a meaningful veteran through free agency, figure it out. Now, as for the offensive line in general, it's interesting to consider that there's only 5 of them under contract for 2023 as we speak right now. Deion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle, Ryan Bates, and Mitch Morse. That's it. So you're going to see some activity here. I'm sure they'll bring back some of these guys as depth pieces or in competition to be depth pieces. But, when you consider the makeup of this room, you have to believe that there's some draft picks coming here, and there's obviously some veteran additions here. So this will be a room that I expect to be under construction and potentially look a lot differently next year when it comes to the personnel. All right, folks, so there you have it. We've done the performance review series for the entire offense and, of course, the specialist, the long snapper, punter, and kicker for the Buffalo Bills. Tomorrow, my intention is herd mentality, and then we'll flip over to the defensive side of the football. And, of course, if there's some big breaking news along the way, we'll get into that as well. I'm expecting at some point the Bills will announce coaching staff changes. I know that there's already been one. Jim Salgado out as the safeties coach, and they've hired a safeties coach, but want to kind of wait. I mean, that's a minor move here in the grand scheme of things, but every year there's been some type of press release once they finalize the staff and what the positions will be for 2023. We'll talk about that whenever that comes through and any other meaningful news. But if that doesn't happen, it's just the herd mentality tomorrow, and then we'll start talking performance review when it comes to the Bills on defense. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.